when you can actually go really dirty. So, but the thing is, if you go too dirty too quickly, you cause unnecessary resistance, right? But if you go not dirty enough, she will not be stimulated. You'll just be a dude talking to her. And you don't want to fall into that trap, because a dude who's just talking to her, who's nice, she's stumbled across many of those, and that's nothing special to her. So you kind of want to have this sweet spot. Now, that said, if you go a little bit too dirty or not dirty enough, you can easily tell and adjust. So basically, one more aspect that I think is very important is to kind of teach, a method for the students to know the sweet spot. And there are two ways I do that. The first one is to, get them really familiar with the principle of escalating the vibe, following a ladder. Basically, start light, see how she reacts. If she reacts good, keep escalating. If she reacts really good, escalate much faster. If she's reacting, a bit neutral, stay where you are, or maybe push it a little bit, but not too much. And if she's reacting badly, that's when you take a step back, because then you have work to do. You got to up the compliance, make her feel comfortable, and then eventually, resume and keep escalating. So the first one is, how to escalate, with a ladder, how to progress the vibe, escalate from social to sexual gradually, and also how to calibrate to her response while you do that. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is to also make them not really fear pushing a little bit too much. If you even get a negative reaction, you know where you have her. It's information. I used to tell my students, even though something may not work, at least you got information. Remember, information is everything, because you cannot be calibrated if you don't have information. If you're stuck somewhere on a neutral vibe, you don't have information. You don't know if you're too slow or too fast. So you kind of always want to trigger a bit of a reaction, but you don't want to push it so far that it, causes a devastating blow in regards to resistance, right? So basically, knowing how to calibrate by pushing things and calibrate your response, but also keep in mind that information is key and try to push it. And that is a good way to kind of, get that balance of not too dirty, but dirty enough, and not too little dirty, right? But dirty enough.
You have another rule, rule number 7, that states you should leave a woman wanting more sex talk, that is. So how do you make that happen?
So I usually tell my students that, a bad seducer is a guy who doesn't, trigger any strong emotions in a woman. A good seducer is one who triggers good emotions. A really good seducer is one who makes her really feel really strong emotions and desire and all that. But the real pro is the one who, triggers those strong emotions, very strong emotions, but also leaves her wanting more. Because the last part is so important, because the moment, you change subject, whatever, she'll be wanting more, so she'll be more invested into the conversation. But there's another dimension, which is that she will always, start seducing herself, start, wondering what's he going to say next, how is he, become curious, want more of the good stuff you're saying that is stimulating, because women do like stimulation, just like men, by the way. So that's a very key thing. And one way this is done is, for example, to talk about something juicy, and before you reach the climax, change the subject. So she's like, okay, he said something really exciting, but I want more of it. That is compliance right there. And that is basically what this rule is trying to accomplish. Get the student to do those things. Leave her wanting more, because that makes it so much easier to progress and escalate the vibe. Because not only will she be more receptive, but she'll be happy whenever you keep escalating the vibe again. And that smoothens the whole process up.
And I think it's worth highlighting how important to seduction this whole creating emotions in the woman is. Like you're saying, if she's neutral, then you don't know where you're at with her. You have to create some emotions so that you can gauge where you're at. And, the really great seducer is creating emotions, and then he's not fully satisfying her. He's leaving her wanting more of the emotions that he can create. So she's trying to get more and more out of him. There's this whole thing that a lot of guys, particularly guys that are beginners, are missing. And they're just going up and saying their stuff, and they're not thinking about creating emotions. They're thinking about, what does the woman want? Am I meeting her criteria? They're not thinking about, I need to be inspiring these emotions. And as you get better and better as a seducer, that becomes a bigger and bigger part of your focus.
Exactly, absolutely. And I would say that even intermediate guys to keep forgetting about, leaving her wanting more, because they have quite a bit of material and they use that and they keep bombarding her with material. But then what happens is that, she's never left wanting more. And there's also a trap here, which is if you only keep stimulating her nonstop, there will be a form of inflation happening, right? that eventually she'll be like, okay, I'm getting so bombarded with stimulation, now I'm getting used to it. And then it loses its effect. So not only can you actually get in trouble if you don't leave her wanting more, but by leaving her wanting more, everything becomes so much more powerful. So there's like a double benefit here.
Yeah. So let's talk gambits. You're a big fan of using gambits, that is, tried and true scripts or sequences you take a woman through that create a predictable response in her, or relatively predictable. So gambits can be very powerful, but they're also, they've kind of fallen out of fashion among most seduction coaches today, which is a loss because most very skilled guys use gambits, whether it is the guy's own gambit or somebody else's that he's adopted. So can you tell me what a gambit is and why you think it's important that students get used to using them?
So gambit serves two purposes, in my opinion. It's actually three. The first one is to kind of give you certain tools as an example, basically, of something that works. Because you've crafted something with a trusted theme, which has a certain purpose, and who's been tested, and it's powerful. And it has all those mechanisms of things you can achieve, right? Like setting a sexual frame, for example. Communicate sexual pricing, which is, one of my special tools, basically, which is making her see you as this experienced lover. Or you can set a frame of, sex positive frame where she feels you non-judgmental. Or you can set a frame of high value or even whatever, right? Anything. So you can basically cram up all those benefits, all those mechanisms that can up her compliance and facilitate the whole process into one gambit that's been tested. You know how to use it, you know when to use it, you know how it works. So, and then when you do that, you have a weapon of mass seduction. Now, the other purpose a gambit serves is that it gives you an example of something that works. So you can actually use the gambits as an inspiration for freestyling. So in an ideal world, which we can try to replicate, is that you have certain tested gambits, which you can use whenever you're in trouble or you really need this extra, push, whenever you need that, like this kind of a get out of jail free card. But then you can also use them as a template for how a certain teams can be delivered or how certain mechanisms or benefits from those mechanisms can be implicated in your interaction. So you can add some spice. So basically use as a template for how you can actually naturally talk and have this natural conversation. Because many guys I see these days, especially with this whole new natural game thing, is that they approach a girl and then they just talk. They're just fluffing. They're just a guy talking with her and hoping for the best. Unless you're lucky, that's not going to work. You need some spice. You need something to up her compliance, something to stimulate her. You need all that. And one way to do that is to have gambits that can give you an idea of how that can be done. And when you can't, then you can also have this get out of jail free card and use that. So it serves two purposes here. And the third purpose is it's a great tool to teach people those mechanisms because they can see how they all fit together and, they can replicate them and use those gambits to create their own or own variation of it or even their own gambits. So, three purposes. One, to give a template on how a good conversation with all its spice basically works and how you can add them to a conversation. The second purpose is a get out of jail free card, when you need that little push. The third thing is to actually, teach guys mechanisms so they can use them and create their own gambits eventually.
Those are some great benefits. You're kind of a mad scientist of gambits. There are a lot of guys out there that are using your 8 types of orgasms routine as just one example. And, a funny detail you told me just the other day is that when you made it up, there actually was not an 8th type of orgasm. You only had 6 or 7. You actually didn't come up with the 8th orgasm until a couple of years later. It was the full body orgasm. When I heard that one, I thought, that sounds a little bit fishy. So I guess that's the reason why. So what do you think makes you so good at coming up with these sex talk gambits that work really, really well and so many guys end up using?
So first, a little comment on the 8 type of orgasm gambit. Actually, the one funny thing is that no girls have actually busted my balls about me only mentioning 6 or 7 orgasms. They just keep listening. They never stop me and be like, oh shit, you didn't tell this 8th one. So, I just made an 8th one.
Yeah, and do you think that's because they don't want to wreck the vibe, or do you think they get so caught up that they forget about the 8th one?
They don't care. I don't think they notice it, and I don't think they really care either. What's the point? What's in it for them? And I don't even think that they're even paying attention, because when you are in an interaction with a stranger, you don't count the amount of, subjects they talk about. You don't do that. Women don't do that. Most men don't either. But I want to just get back to this, because the reason actually this wasn't a problem was that even though they may react, I still leave them wanting more, right? I only told 6, so even if they consciously knew about it but didn't confront me with it, they still, would think, oh, he didn't tell me the 8th one, and they'll be curious about it. So you leave her wanting more. And also the benefit here is that whenever the vibe starts fading out a little bit, I can go back in and say like, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you the 8th one, and then you're back on fire. So there's a lot of benefits here. So it's actually a bit deliberate too, I'm gonna be honest. Now, how do I actually come up with gambits? There are multiple things here. First of all, I go out a lot, and a few gambits, they just occur when you end up in a conversation with a girl and you talk about a certain subject, and then you realize, oh shit, this was actually really good. Because once you go home, you're like, oh, maybe that's actually did have an impact on my interaction with her. Maybe that had an impact on the end result. And then you look at it and you try to understand why it worked, how it worked, and did it have anything to do with the girl, with the vibe of the venue, or with the timing and all that stuff. So basically what is very important here is to have this kind of a framework that you can use to diagnose your night out, which is something I teach guys, by the way. I really teach them this framework so they can analyze their game, so they can know what worked, why it worked, and how to make it work better. And also, if it didn't work, what didn't work and why it didn't work, and how they can, change it up or, change it with something else. And the other reason I think is because I'm reading a lot of, sex-related subjects, social subjects and all that. And, I usually tell my students, they tell me like, oh, I don't have any ideas for any gambits or any themes I can talk with girls. I tell them, hey, you know what? Just read a book on sexology or erotic novel or whatever, a philosophy book about sex or sociology book about sex, and you get some ideas and you can try it out and see if it works. If it doesn't, well, too bad. If it does, well, you may have stumbled upon a golden nugget. So, reading a bit, discussing with people, discussing with girls, going out in the field, trying out stuff, and see if it works. That's the way to discover the gambits, and I, do all of that. And I want my students to do the same.
All right. Well, we're going to come back to gambits, and you've got a new one in particular to share with us today. But before we spell out specific gambits, I'd like to talk about what you're doing with your gambits. So there's a little thing that you call sexual prizing. So what is that, and how's it work?
All right, so actually there's 2 dimensions. There is sexual prizing, and there is sexual reframing. And I know if you remember, I mentioned earlier, you want to stimulate her, but you also want to, you want to create desire, but you also want to make her feel allowed to, desire you or to act upon those desires. So sexual prizing is basically the tool that makes her feel desire. And it's a bit different than just arousal, which is based by touching, you turn her on, because this actually makes her consciously desire you. She has a reason to desire you, because the way sexual prizing works is that you actually convey that you are a skilled, experienced lover. And basically that is done by talking about sex, sharing sexual knowledge, sharing sexual experience, sharing even sexual opinions about sex, talking about something you've experienced, something you know about women, something you know about sexuality, something you know about the female mind that relates to sexuality, all that stuff. And that will make her feel, oh shit, that guy, he knows what he's doing. And if I do get him to bed, he's gonna give me the sex of my life. And I don't know if you've ever, when you started out, you went out, you talked with this girl, she wasn't that hot, she wasn't the sexiest in the club, but you talked with her anyway, and then she starts talking about sex, about how she happens to be very skilled at something sexual that you are very into. Let's say you're very into blowjobs. I know that's not your thing really, but let's say you are. Some many guys are, and she talks about how she loves deep throating and gagging and that special technique she learned in this porn movie or whatever, you'll be like, shit, I may just want to consider going home with her to get that, that powerful sensation, that good sex. And in fact, most women are sexually frustrated because, even though women can have stronger orgasms than men, they have a harder time. So they get less often orgasms and good sex. So that's why this is so valued. And that's the power of sexual prizing, because she feels that you are the guy who can finally satisfy her, right? And that is the benefit of sexual prizing, and you convey that through sex talk. Now, the other one is sexual reframing, which is basically to share sex-positive frames, that you're non-judgmental, that you are, respectful, that you are, that you know about her situation, that you are, low key, so she won't get judged, so she can feel very secure about having sex with you. So now just imagine for a moment, you are the guy who's going to give her the sex of her life, and she's going to get no social consequences from it and be comfortable. Well, guess what? I don't see any reason for why she wouldn't go for it. Now it's all about making it happen, escalate the vibe, and take care of logistics, right?
Indeed. So once you're the sexual prize and you frame things so that women feel totally allowed to have sex with you, do girls just chase you for sex? Do they start trying to drag you to the bathroom? Or what is the actual effect? So how would a guy recognize that he's successfully sexually prized himself and framed her this way?
So it has happened that girls has dragged me to the bathroom, but I gotta be honest, it doesn't happen that often because women by nature, most women, that is, there are some exceptions of course, they're not like dominant in their nature, so they're not gonna make it happen. And there's also a bit of stigma around girls making it happen. But usually, any typical sign of interest that you'll see when you do something right, they will occur, but much stronger. And also she may start touching you a little bit more. And, the most usual, mind-blowing response that I get is when she starts asking you something along the lines of, so where do you live? Just out of the blue. And when a girl's asking you out of the blue where you live, it's a good sign.
Yeah,
or
it's a loud and clear sign.
Or sometimes it will be like, okay, are you some kind of a sex guru? It's like, okay, that means that can be a test. It's a bit of a mix of a test and a compliment at the same time. So, you just answer something like, yeah, I'm just a guy who enjoys having a good time and enjoying myself and discovering myself. And, you're good. Or she'll be like, okay, who are you? Like, because she can relate to so many things you said, or she's so blown away by it. That's also a very strong response that, usually means you're doing something right. And, the way to the bed is pretty short. Or you will have something along the lines of like, get very invested in a conversation and, basically start complimenting you and be like, you're interesting, you're fascinating, you're so right. Where did you learn all this stuff? And she gets very intrigued and the conversation happens so much very smoothly. And it's like the conversation becomes as if you've been fuck buddies for a few months. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. So what ways do you teach students to enable them to do this sexual prizing with the women they meet?
The short answer is sex talk. So basically find ways to communicate that you are that experienced, skilled, knowledgeable lover, but doing so in a way that doesn't trigger those defense mechanisms. And that is to follow a certain frame. That is very important. This is very important. You mentioned that we're only going to discuss 2 rules of sex talk, but this one is important, which is probably rule number 1. You need to have the frame that is, you are a sexual guy. You know what you're doing. You know what you want. You know what she wants. And you will provide her the best sex of her life. You can, but only if she is behaving in a way that makes you feel that she deserves it. And the reason this frame is very important is because you are communicating that you can have sex with her, not that you will. Because if you communicate that you will or that you want to have sex with her right away, you'll trigger those defense mechanisms. Whereas if you communicate that you may or that you can have sex with her, then you kind of create this mixed, a little bit of a mixed signals thing. And then she'll become curious about, okay, this guy's so sexual, but why, is he going to have sex with me or not? And then you keep her wondering and you leave her wanting more. Again, back to that is so important. So you get all those things. So not only will you not trigger those defense mechanisms, but you'll also make her chase you because she'll be curious about whether or not you're actually going to have sex with her. Basically, the power of push and pull, the power of mixed signals, shouldn't underestimate that. And that combined with sexual prizing, that's a bomb. That's a bomb right there. That's a weapon of mass seduction right there.
All right. So we've been talking about students and what you're teaching to your students a lot. You first started coaching a few years back, and I remember at the beginning you were a bit hesitant. So you didn't know if you could train other guys to do what you're doing. You didn't know what kind of students you'd get. You're a few years in now. You've worked with a variety of students. You keep your student numbers low due to how limited your own time is. I don't know if guys know this, but you're a doctoral student and you have a full going out life. So it's not like free time is abundant for you. I wonder if you'd tell me about a student you've had. So how was he when he came to you? What did you work with him on? What his journey was like and what sort of results he's getting now?
So basically I had this guy I took under my wing for a very prolonged coaching, kind of a bit like the packages that, we're going to offer. Take time, it's not just one session, it's over time. And I took him under my wing in person. He was an in-person student. And he had just moved from Syria, which, most of us know by now is a war zone. And he's been experiencing a lot of trauma. Most guys when they start out, they have a bit of trauma, but this guy had quite a bit of baggage. And he went out doing stuff. He had a lot of potential. But then I started teaching him a few things, and he started getting a bit better. But the real power was when he had bad nights, because when you start out you do fail a bit. He was getting a bit frustrated, and I told him, it's not about success one night, it's about the long term. You failed tonight, that's sad, I feel you, but if that failure allows you to become better so that you get 10 better nights, that is the key. So let's make sure that this failure leads to 10 better nights. So what we do is we break up the whole night, we look at what worked, what didn't work, when did it fail, what happened, what can you do better. Was there something wrong with the calibration, the material, the girl, him, the delivery, or perhaps the frame? All that stuff that we look into, we break it down so that he can adjust and do it better. And now, eventually, he started getting success, right? And then, we will break the night down again and see what works and try to make it work again to replicate the success. Because many guys, they go out, they have this great night, they get results, and they're happy about it, and they have all reasons to be happy about it. But they don't learn about their success. They don't break it down properly so they can replicate that in a similar situation, right? So that's what we did, and eventually started getting a lot of results. I started teaching him a bit more advanced, material, sex talk gambits, all that stuff, and eventually started getting really good. And his real success was when he actually went to this high-end venue. The first time he went there, he was shitting himself. It was intimidating, which it can be, by the way. But eventually he pulled a really hot girl who was actually an Olympic champion of the country he was, living in. And she ended up becoming a TV star a year later. And that was the moment he felt like, okay, I just nailed it. I'm good. I know my shit. And, after that, he's been hooked and addicted. And I've also had other students who, they come from different places. Some are a bit too shy when it comes to escalating the vibe with them. I had one guy, he was very afraid of, escalating the vibe. So we went through all that kind of stuff that related to how to deal with potential resistance, because learning how to deal with resistance makes it so much less scary, right? And how to escalate more smoother. And eventually he started getting really sexual because he wasn't sexual enough. And now, most of his interaction at least leads to make out, if not getting back to his place in sex. And, I also had guys who have been too direct, and getting rejected a bit too prematurely. And with those guys, we kind of slow it down a little bit. They don't have an issue with escalating the vibe, but more of an issue related to calibration. So it's important to see that there's a lot of different issues at play. And I also have one student who actually made me a little bit upset because he was struggling a bit, and then eventually he made it work. After a little bit of training and stuff, and everything was done perfectly. He broke down the night, everything was perfect. I was like, this is great, man. And then he forgot to download Uber, and he didn't get the Uber back home, and he didn't get laid. And I'm like, dude, did I just spend so much time with you? And you just forgot to download Uber, man. Jesus.
It's frustrating.
I can tell you one thing. The guy, he has Uber now. I can tell you that much.
I'll bet.
And logistics are important. Logistics is the kind of thing that you only make the mistake once, because, logistical issues, when you fuck up with logistics, if you don't have condoms back at home, or your toilet is dirty or shit like that, and you fuck up because of that, you'll learn, and you'll never make the mistake again.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Mistakes you make once.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, these are the different type of students, and that's why I enjoy with it. It's to deal with those different type of guys who have different stories to tell, different goals, different personalities, but also different issues when it comes to seduction. And I've seen it all, so it's not an issue to pinpoint what's exactly wrong and work with that. Because many students, they come in, they have an idea of what they need to work on, and then we talk a little bit, and then we realize, oh shit, that is not actually the issue. That is a real issue. And we work on that, and then they see results. And it's always nice to see results happen. I love when some of my students send me some success stories over mail. I have one guy, he moved abroad and got laid on the beach by talking with a girl on the beach. Perfectly well execution, and I was so happy reading that. It warms my heart. It makes my work valuable in a way. I feel valued, and I feel like he's getting value out of it. It's a pleasure. That's all I can say.
Phenomenal. So let's go back to gambits. And then I also want to ask you about hooking, which has been a big topic guys are asking about a lot these days. Then we'll talk about what you're looking for in students and who'd be qualified. So, gambits. You've always got new ones you're cooking up. You've got another new one coming up. We'll probably be sharing it on the site in a couple of weeks or perhaps in a month or two. I'm not sure how many articles you have in the queue before that one. But what can you tell me about the perverted purity gambit?
All right. So actually, the perverted purity gambit is one that I've kind of made up for this little podcast here, because the perversion gambit will come. Actually, there will be 2 versions of it posted on the website. So I want to make something unique here, and I also want to demonstrate that you can actually combine gambits and make some of your own on the spot. So I'm going to mix this with the new gambit that will be posted, and also use an older one, which is called the purity gambit, which is on the forum. And if you're not on the forum, that's an excuse. Join us there. So basically, that gambit, that perverted purity gambit, will go something along those lines, because we need to have a transition, because many guys do struggle with transitions, which is something I teach too, by the way. Lots of ways to transition to sex talk and all that. I'll give you a very basic transition, which would be something along the lines of, hey, you know what? Actually, I had this little interesting conversation with my friend Sarah the other day. And, she told me that, guys, they want sex, but they also seek this they want women to be pure. They want this purity aspect, this asexual Madonna aspect. Why is that? And I was like, yeah, well, there's probably something to it. But actually, let's take a step back, Sarah. I think there is, what is purity? She's like, well, clean, not naughty and all that stuff. Oh, I told her, well, actually, I think, purity, it's perhaps being pure in a sense, true to oneself, true to one's desires, true to one's sexuality. As a matter of fact, actually, I read a very interesting text the other day, which covered sexual perversion from this guy called Gerald Levinson. And he talked about how actually abstention, not going for it and holding back on your sexual desires is actually perverted. Because for him, perversion is basically opting for a suboptimal version of something. So in that case, not going for your full potential is perversion. And in regards to sex, that would be not going for your full sexual potential, like discovering other human beings, connecting with people, discovering your own sexuality, learning about your sexuality, learning new stuff, discovering new sex positions, discovering new knowledge about sex, all that stuff. You don't get to do that if you don't go for it. And then you don't opt for your ultimate sexual self. So then you're perverted. And how can you be actually pure if you're perverted? Well, you can't. So perhaps, to not be perverted, you have to go for it and just, really experiment sexually and be curious about things. And that is by being purist, because that's also being true to oneself, because people really do desire discovering themselves. So I think there's 2 dimensions here. So this gambit is actually quite interesting, because you reframe perversion as, not having sex, basically. And it's actually quite interesting, because the philosopher which this gambit was inspired from is actually a real philosopher who wrote a paper about this. And by the way, there will be a reference in the article when it comes up, so people can read the actual article from the philosopher. And so basically, you reframe perversion as not having sex. And nobody wants to be perverted. So suddenly, she wants to fall for your frame, which is more sex positive, and she doesn't want to be perverted, so she can't hold back anymore, right? And also, she wants to be pure, and now pure is also something that is sexual, which is being true to one's sexual desire. So now, she doesn't want to be impure or perverted, and her way to not be impure or perverted is to actually have sex and be a little bit freaky. And that's a good frame, because now you suddenly communicate that that's what you desire, and also that's something good, and you convince her that that is the way to do things. And she will want to accept that frame, because it's a very desirable frame. It's a frame where there's freedom and passion and desire and all that stuff, so she's likely to accept it. So that's a very good way to kind of set those sex positive frame, those reframing sex as something good. But there's also some sexual pricing here, because it's very obvious that someone who shares those frames is someone who's experienced, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't have this reflection about sex, right? Because that's the way an experienced person would talk. So there's a lot of things crammed up in one gambit. And again, that's the power of gambits, when you can cram up so many benefits into one thing. So you get that powerful, weapon of mass seduction.
That seems like a super useful gambit. So now when you work with students, what do you focus on when teaching them these gambits? Because my guess is there's a lot more to it that you're teaching them than simply just saying the words.
So the mechanisms, we talked about, how to put in sexual pricing, how to, reframe sex as something positive and not a big deal. and also, set the sexual frame. What sexual frame you want to set? Is it one of freakiness, one of dirtiness, one of whatever? But also there's the delivery, and I don't know if you noticed, but the way I deliver the gambit right here is a very straightforward way of talking. Just as normal